channel. So again, welcome. My name is Ana Soler. I am the chairperson of the National Association for Educational Translators and Interpreters of Spoken Languages, or NAETISL. I have the privilege of leading the organization and seeing how it has been evolving for the past 4 years. I just cannot believe we have already turned 4. But I do want to share a little bit of information about what we do and some of the things that that we have accomplished so far. And also, of course, introduce our wonderful speakers of today. We're going to have a panel discussion, and I'm hoping that you write your questions on the chat as we go, as they come about, so that we have a chance to be able to share that with our speakers, okay? So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen real quick to tell you a little bit about who we are as an organization. And just want to make sure that you can hear me okay. If somebody can give me a thumbs up, make sure I'm not choppy or anything. Okay, thank you so much. All right. So as I mentioned, NAETISL just turned 4 years old. We are a nonprofit organization. One of the things that we are most proud of is the fact that we have brought everybody to the table, meaning that we engage not only multilingual families, not only interpreters and translators, but also the people that get to make decisions like school administrators and teachers, school-based interpreters, liaisons, etc. So we are an organization that collaborates with different groups to make sure that language access and language justice is achieved in our educational settings, including early childhood. And so to do that, we have accomplished a series of tasks. The first one was to establish a national code of ethics for interpreters and translators in education. Again, the code of ethics that we created was based on the work that was already done by the medical interpreters in our world, and also legal interpreters, sign language interpreters, and also the Minnesota Department of Education, who actually started this work many, many years ago, way before us, and created kind of the foundation for the code of ethics that we have available on our website. Speaking of our website, we have a wealth of resources, and I'll point to some of those for those of you who are interested in educational settings. Lots of free resources. You do not have to be a member of NAETISL to access. Basically, our organization was created so that we can share our knowledge, our experience with those of you who may be working in other areas and are interested in educational interpreting. So I'll kind of point out to some things that you may want to look at. We also have a multilingual family advisory board, which is absolutely amazing. And you'll see on our website a lot of materials that have been translated in various languages, and they are responsible for that. They are the voice of the families in our communities, and they tell us what they need from schools and school leaders in terms of language access and really the logistics of it. You know, what type of information needs to be translated and what is not, what type of interpreters are being offered, and you know, which school districts may not be offering what they need. So they really get to be the voice in our community and kind of feed us information so that we can create the resources that are needed. So we create and identify resources for interpreters and translators, and my main role in the organization is provide the research behind it. As many of you know here, I'm close to completing a doctoral degree in special education. I'm hoping to be done with this pretty soon. But the whole idea, thank you, the whole idea of doing that and starting the process was really to have a little bit more research in terms of language access, the impact of interpreters and translators in our school settings, and the impact of training and qualifications in all of our translators and interpreters in school settings, and how that affects communication and engagement of our families. So I'm looking forward to publishing a lot of that information and making it available for NAETISL. We are in the middle of actually creating a national certification test for spoken language interpreters. And what you see here is a big, the cycle of this monster. It is an amazing process, and a process that has taught us many, many things, about the organization, about our community of interpreters, about the needs for training and some of the qualifications that our interpreters and translators have. But as you can see, it's a very complex process. At the moment, we are conducting a pilot test, and we have 222 participants who have volunteered to take this written pilot test and eventually take an oral pilot test in 2025 to see if we can create a valid tool that schools can use to actually certify interpreters on a national level. So we're pretty excited about the work. It's been a lot of different steps to be able to get here, but we feel pretty confident about the team that we have together. The process, even though it's very tedious and very long, but we feel that our profession deserves it, and our families and educators need to have a valid tool to be able to show their skills and to demonstrate their knowledge. I do encourage you to stay connected with us. Again, you do not have to be a member of NAETISL. I'm not here to promote our membership, although we welcome you all. We have members from, I think now 38 states and 6 countries, which we're pretty excited about. But I do encourage you to get connected with us. We do share our newsletter, and we have a lot of great information that could be useful to you as you learn a little bit about our profession, okay? So I do want to move on and introduce our wonderful speakers. But before I do that, I just want to thank you for taking the time on your Friday, whether it's morning or afternoon, to be able to be with us. We really appreciate it, because we are all for professional development. You are all lifelong learners, and you do not have to be here. So we really appreciate you taking the time to spend this little bit of your life with us, and we're hoping that we share a lot of great information. But thank you for making a difference, whether you work in a medical field, education, legal, the United Nations, wherever you are, you are making a difference every single day. And we really appreciate it, and we're hoping that we can highlight some of the things that you can do to continue doing that. So I thank you for choosing to stay bilingual, because you don't have to, choosing to stay multilingual, and really using those skills to help your communities, or to, if you're new to interpreting or translating, to want to use those skills to help your communities. And really, you're helping us create those cultural and linguistic bridges wherever you land, wherever field you land. But really, I really appreciate it, because you're taking the time to be able to do better and to learn about other professions. So thank you for being here. So I do want to introduce our wonderful speakers of today. I'm going to let them introduce themselves. Allison, I think we've known each other for a while, and super happy to have you here. And Andrew, we recently met, but I've been just so impressed with your experience and your knowledge. And so I look forward to giving you a little bit of leading questions, but hoping that our audience also asks any questions of you as we go along. So I'm going to go ahead and start with Allison. If you can introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your work.
Thank you so much, Anna. Thank you, everyone, for being here today. It's really an honor and a privilege to be here. My name is Allison, and I came to literary translation through poetry. I don't think any of us think when we are little, I'm going to grow up and be a literary translator, but translating literary works, poetry, plays, works of fiction, it really gives me a lot of hope for the future and for the world. There is no work more important than the work that each and every one of you do as translators or interpreters, by providing language access and equity to English language learners. You really are changing the world every day, and it's very, very important work. I have also been a conference chair for the Oregon Society of Translators and Interpreters annual conference. This will be my 5th year. I'm going to pop this in the chat. It's my email, and it's also some information about the conference. We have speakers again from all over the world, from as far away as Ukraine and Zimbabwe this year. So the early bird special ends in August, and we also have volunteer opportunities. After the conference, you're welcome to email me at that email and ask me questions about translation too. I would be happy to answer them, but probably after the conference that I'm coordinating. Thank you again for being here today.
Thank you, Allison. And we look forward to participating in the conference. We have one of our course instructors presenting information about learning disabilities and how to work with families that have a child with a learning disability, and kind of expanding on that vocabulary. So always looking forward to participating in your conference, and just love to see some of you there as well. So thank you, Allison, for being here. And Andrew, tell us a little bit about you.
Hi, thank you very much. My name is Andrew Larson. I'm the lead interpreter, trainer, and mentor for the Interpreter Studio and the interpreterstudio.com. We are an education platform for professional interpreters that are looking to get certified or renew their certification. And this whole company, we strive to educate interpreters. And to second what Allison said, that it's just such important work. And especially here in Denver, we have such a huge population of various diverse languages, and interpreters are needed both in medical and educational fields. And so we put up a lot of videos, and we do a lot of training, a lot of different workshops and activities to get interpreters to be the best that they can be. So I'm really happy to be here as well. I'm also really excited to hear Allison's side of it, because literary translation that was my dream job years ago before I became an interpreter and went down that route. So I'm very happy to be here as well, and looking forward to some questions.
Super. Thank you so much. I love that. And yes, I don't know that I've ever even thought about literary, I can't even say it, translation. So I look forward to kind of learning a little bit more about you and your work as well, Andrew. So if you don't mind, those of you who are here, if you can just write on the chat kind of your background, not a whole essay. We just want to know kind of, if you are in the medical field, legal field, or if you're just starting as an interpreter, and also what state you're visiting us from. We would greatly appreciate that. So I have a few questions for Allison and also Andrew, but of course, participants, if you have any burning questions that you want to ask our speakers, this is what this panel is for. So feel free to do that. But I do want to start by kind of exploring the career path. What were some of the early decisions that you made to do the work that you do, Andrew and Allison, and to kind of choose this path, or whether the path kind of chose you, and how you went about establishing that career path. So I'm going to start with Allison.
Thank you so much. I was really preparing my comments today for high school students, and I will say that my path didn't start with a high school diploma. I did not finish high school, and I got a GED instead. And with that, I was able to, move forward with my career, go to college, and also work abroad. I've taught in Mexico. I worked with the International Associated Press in South America for 2 years. So it really doesn't matter how you start the race, it's how you finish. I come to literary translation through poetry. I'm first a poet and writer. So I think to do this work, you really have to like words. You just have to like words all the time. You have to like words in every language. And I do. I work in English and Spanish. I'm studying Portuguese. And since 2021, I've been learning a pre-colonial first original language of Mexico and Guatemala. It's really a beautiful thing. I did not intend to learn another language at my age, but I met my instructor at a posada in Mexico, and she invited me to study with her a few months later. So I think it's just really good to like words. If you want to become a literary translator, you are welcome to email me after the conference, and I would be happy to talk to you more about it. But I will say that your first publication is the most difficult. You need to be able to build a portfolio. Getting those first publications and building a portfolio is definitely the most challenging thing. Once you've gotten a few publications, and I started out publishing in journals, literary magazines, online reviews, then it becomes easier to get more work. And also, I guess the advice I had prepared for the high school students is just read a lot. You probably aren't reading a lot. You can only translate as well as you can write in that language. So read in the original language that you're translating from, read from the language you're translating into. It's just really important to know what is being published now, but also to read classics and be familiar with the trajectory of that language.
Excellent. That's very interesting. Now, I love the idea of creating a portfolio. Allison, I'm just curious about how you got started. What was your first, I guess, introduction to, I mean, did you even know how to start a portfolio, or did you have any connections that kind of helped you guide you through that process?
No, not at all. I went through a few master's programs. I started publishing my own poetry, but no one ever told me how to do this. And there are a lot of things that I wish I had known when I was starting. For instance, about rights to literary works. About rights to your translation, about contracts. It isn't so important if you're publishing your own creative work, or maybe if you're publishing individual pieces, but when it comes to books, for instance, I've translated books that have become major motion pictures and movies, and there are things that I wish I had known about rights that I didn't know when I got started.
Wow, that's super interesting. I never even thought about, that piece of it. And I think sometimes in our professions, or maybe I'm just not aware of it, but we don't get the legal side of things. We get perhaps the techniques of interpreting and translating, but sometimes we don't get the legal side, and sometimes interpreters and translators are not protected, and their property, their intellectual property is not protected, because we're just not aware of those things. So thank you for mentioning that. Super. All right, I'm going to get to that same question for Andrew. So tell us a little bit about your career path. How did you end up doing this?
Yeah, thank you. Wow, I never anticipated being an interpreter. If you would have asked me 16 years ago what I was going to do for a career, I would have never even, interpreter was not anywhere on my radar. I went to school in Spain, the University of Sevilla. And then from there, I went to Cartagena, Colombia, and was teaching English for a few years and loved it. Actually, to the literary translator, that's where I wanted to become a literary translator because I fell in love with Garcia Marquez. And his quote about translators is that his novels are better in English than they are in Spanish because of his translators. So that's kind of where that started. Alas, I did not become a translator. I came back to the United States and was curious to find something where I could keep my language and keep using Spanish. Ended up taking Bridging the Gap medical interpreter training course in 2010, late 2010, going into 2011. And from there, things just took off. There's a huge need for interpreters of all languages. I'm in Denver, Colorado. We have a very diverse community here of lots of different languages. And between the schools and the medical field, there's just always a need for interpreters. There's a huge shortage of them. And so I was pretty quickly, right after getting out of interpreter training, just started being a freelance interpreter. I did that for about 12 years. Before taking some next steps, I got certified with both CCHI and NBCMI, got licensed to train Bridging the Gap. I'm currently working on getting the TCI. Saw a couple of the community interpreter trainers on this Zoom call as well. That was just kind of how things took off. I was always looking to improve and take the next step, and then started to notice that there was a need for qualified interpreters that got training, because sometimes there's just such a shortage of interpreters that they'll hire on people because they're bilingual or multilingual, but they don't have any formal training with how to be an interpreter, or the protocol, the ethics, the standards of practice that we have in the medical field and the educational field as well. So that's kind of where the Interpreter Studio came about. We realized that we needed to educate interpreters and really give them the training and the expertise necessary to go out in the field and give the best possible service to our communities. So that's where it went. It's been a long haul, but I would have never expected to be here. And I'm really happy to be an interpreter. It's the most satisfying career field that I could have possibly imagined.
I love that. Thank you for sharing that. And it seems a common thread, right? That most of us kind of fall into this job just by default. Some of us, grew up, in another country and came as a young person and automatically by default became interpreters, whether we wanted or not. So I appreciate that, that path that you are telling us about, Andrew. So what suggestions do you have? And I'm going to start with Andrew. What suggestions do you have for people that perhaps are fairly new to being an interpreter in a formal mode? So most of us, have been interpreting informally for families, for friends, but may not have the training or the professional background to be able to do it correctly, for example, or ethically. And so I want to kind of hear from you what you suggest that we do to get started and to really, kind of follow a more professional path to do what we do every day.
Yeah, absolutely. That's right up my alley. That's what I do with our interpreters every day. Is help them get started and help them get on the right path to make sure that they get all of the professional steps necessary to get into the field and thrive in that field. To what you said earlier, most of my interpreters do start off interpreting for their family members in hospitals, going to their medical appointments with their parents or their other family members, or in schools, and kind of grow up with it. And then they, like you said, they kind of fall into it just inherently because they have been doing it since they were children. One of the other things we really advocate against in the Interpreter Studio is the use of children as interpreters. However, I know that that's how a lot of people get started into it. I would say that the absolute best way to work your way into a more professional field of interpreting is do one of the training courses or find seminars and get memberships with professional organizations for interpreting. Besides NAETISL and you have the CCHI, you have NBCMI, you have the IMIA, the International Medical Interpreters Association. Man, there are so many national and international organizations that provide education and provide certifications necessary. If you go into the medical field, I very highly recommend that you do one of the 40-hour trainings. I know some states actually require that before you are a medical interpreter. Colorado does not. However, it'd be very difficult to get into the field if you haven't done one of those. And then look into getting certified in your languages as well, because that just will absolutely jump your career and just propel you forward and provide a lot of opportunities. Once you're on a national certification registry, you'll start getting offers. You'll just opportunities and doors will open left and right for you once you kind of continue those paths. And then to just second what Allison said as well is to keep up your language skills. Continuing education and professional development is a career-long endeavor. And so listening to podcasts or, reading journals in all of the, not only your original language, but your target languages as well. And really just keeping up your professional development, being a part of anything that you can is really the best way. How I propelled my career was getting to know people, going to conferences, meeting other interpreters, doing things like this, where you get to interact with interpreters from all over the country. And then suddenly, it's actually a much smaller world than you would imagine between interpreters. When I go to conferences, I see a lot of the same interpreters from all over the country. And we all work together to make this the best field that we possibly can. So my recommendation is just continually look for new opportunities to improve your skills.
Thank you, Andrew. And I think, those strategies are really interesting. And sometimes we look for, of course, courses are important and, having that structure is important, but sometimes those everyday tools that we have, sometimes we forget that we have them, right? I know that I learned a lot of my English through music and just by reading some of the lyrics and kind of comparing, and then I learned a lot of slang. So it was really helpful for me to kind of use that tool, and it was free, and nobody judged me. It was just me against me. So sometimes those free tools that are available in our environment, could be definitely helpful. So thank you for that. But I don't see a lot of that in translation. And I wonder, Allison, if you have any suggestions. For example, if I wanted to all of a sudden, switch career gears and start, developing my translation skills, what are some things that I can do to be able to do that?
Thank you so much, Anna, and that was very interesting. Andrew, so if you wanted to switch up your career, I would continue to have a backup career. Actually, a lot of my paid work, I also am a teacher, and especially if you're a literary translator, and especially if you want to translate poetry, you may want to have some other options. I would definitely agree with Andrew as far as joining professional organizations. Really, it wasn't my, my schooling or my academic environment that gave me kind of my knowledge and my start in literary translation. It's been the organizations I belong to, going to conferences, participating in events like this one at NAETISL. It's really important because as a translator, more so than as an interpreter, you're going to spend a lot of time at home alone, talking to your plants and cats. So you're going to need that community to continue to grow. And Also, if you can visit the country, a country that speaks the language that you want to translate out of or into also, that can be very helpful. I realize there are some ethical considerations as far as travel, as far as the environment, but it really helps to be there. It helps to go to readings. It helps to go to bookstores. It helps to visit university presses. I have substituted that a bit during the pandemic by, I had never had social media. My face wasn't on Facebook, but it is a good way to to kind of bridge that if you're unable to travel, joining groups. I belong to a literary translation, several literary translation groups on social media. I belong to Translators with Cats. It's just the best thing because we don't actually talk shop there. We just share pictures of cats on our keyboard, basically, but it is a community. And as a literary translator, you're going to need that community. Come to the OSTI, Oregon Society of Translators or Interpreters Conference. I'm in Oregon, and the ATA is having their first Oregon conference, ATA 65, in October, and in person, maybe I will see some of you there. It's also important. I feel that almost any translation is can be an act of activism as well. So know what is being published in the country where you want to work as a translator, but also know what isn't being published. A lot of literary works have been published for the first time in translation and not actually in the original language because of the writer's sexual orientation, their gender, their political views. So get to know that as well, because your translation could be the first time this author's work is actually published in a book, just because of so many considerations. And also know that as the translator, you have a great deal of privilege. So please be ethical about that. I know everyone here will be, but I only reach out to writers if I want to work with them. Because there is just so much beautiful work being written all over the world. You can be considered an educated person and never have read anything from Central America, maybe have read one author from Africa, the whole continent of Africa, maybe have read one or two things from the Middle East, but there are hundreds and thousands of very talented writers whose work never gets translated. So please be mindful. The fact that you speak and navigate 2 or 3 or even 4 languages and have had that education and that privilege is really, it's something I consider every time I take on a project.
Wow. I mean, all I can say is wow, because you said so many things that are so close to our heart and the work that we do. But I think we as interpreters and translators, I think we have a lot of power, and sometimes we don't realize how much power we have. Oftentimes when I teach interpreters, we talk about how you are the only person in that room that knows everything that's going on, and nobody is there unless you have another bilingual person in the room. No one knows whether you're saying it right or not, and it's all up to you. And it's a privilege. It's an honor to be able to do that and to be there for families, literally. And I love that that same point that you're making for translations, because we do have the power to do the same with our translation work. So thank you for doing that and for mentioning that, for sure. Now I want to talk a little bit about the challenges that you have in your fields. If you're working as a freelancer, I know we have a lot of folks who are independent contractors here who work as interpreters and translators for a variety of agencies. But what are some of the benefits and also the challenges of working as a freelancer? And I know, Allison, you mentioned that you have to have a second job, to make sure that you that you have what you need. But any other challenges or opportunities that you see in the work that you do? So I'm going to start with Andrew.
Sure. This one is interesting. There are a lot of challenges. There's a lot of benefits too. This is why I've been doing this my whole career. But just from the angle that you were talking about, as far as freelance, I was a freelance interpreter for about 11 years. This is actually the first time that I am not a freelance interpreter anymore. I know that the challenges just inherent with freelance are similar to what Allison was describing with translators, is just finding enough work. That said, depending on your language pair, the challenges are different with different languages. I know here in Denver, if you're one of the more common language pairs like Spanish to English, there is a lot of opportunity for you. But that said, as a freelancer, you're probably going to spread it out across different clients and different agencies. Work in a lot of different fields. One of the big challenges is just that kind of managing your schedule as a freelance interpreter, making sure that you arrive on time and professionally for all of your assignments, even if they're spread across different agencies and different locations. It's a very mobile job as a freelance interpreter. You're going between clinics and hospitals and schools. And I remember driving all over town for that. So as far as logistics, that's one of the challenges as a freelance. But one of the other challenges, if you are more of an in-house interpreter or an employed interpreter somewhere, and really in just the entire medical field at all, is something that I'm actually giving a presentation on later next month, is vicarious trauma and secondary trauma that interpreters deal with. To what Anna was saying earlier is that you're the only person in that room that understands both sides of the conversation completely. And inherently with that, interpreters, because of giving an accurate and faithful interpretation, often we are kind of absorbing or reliving some of those traumatic events that can happen sometimes in the medical field. Understanding that it's part of your job to work when you're working in medical or legal, that there are sometimes negative outcomes. And as the interpreter that is there, you kind of take on a lot of that. And I know that interpreters are generally very inherently empathetic people. We want to help in the field. The majority of the interpreters that I know have gotten into the field because they have that desire to help out the communities with whom they work. And but sometimes that comes with its own challenges as well. And to be able to manage not only your schedule and keep up with it, but also develop that I don't want to say thick skin, but to understanding of what that job entails and just how important, and kind of having being able to monitor and check your compassion and your burnout from those kind of experiences. But to follow up with that, one of the benefits of that to counteract those challenges is just to understand the incredible power of the interpreter. I know that we have impartiality rules and confidentiality rules. And so a lot of people struggle with not being able to do more in those situations and not being able to help out, or they wish they could do something more. And what I always talk about with my interpreters in our trainings is that just recognize you are already assisting and facilitating communication, which is probably the most impactful person in that room. You are giving the opportunity for this family or this patient or this person to ask questions, to be heard, to give voice to their concerns, and to really understand all of the information in that whatever situation they're in. And that is incredibly powerful. And that thought alone for me is a huge benefit of this job, is just knowing how much interpreters are valued for the communities that we work with.
I love that, Andrew. And I think, sometimes we're not reminded of that from external sources, but I think we need to do better at reminding ourselves of the impact that we make in every field, whether medical, sign language, legal, educational. You make a huge difference. And the self-care, it is something that we don't do enough of, and we don't talk about it enough. And I really love that more and more information is being provided to interpreters about what to do and how to take care of yourselves, because it really, no matter how rewarding this work is, it is also very difficult sometimes. And I'll talk a little bit about educational settings and what that's like, because I know that medical and legal, you have your challenges. And of course, as translators, it's a very lonely work. And I'm glad, Allison, you have your cats to help you out, because it really does make a difference to just have a team, whether it's, humans or not, but just to have a community to be able to support you. So but Allison, what can you tell us about some of the challenges and perhaps opportunities that you have in your field?
That's a good question, Anna, and I saw it on the list of potential questions, but I haven't really developed a response to that. I guess one of the challenges is just not getting paid. I have work that I have completed for major publishers several years ago and have never been paid for it. Even if you have a contract, a publisher during the pandemic, I worked with a couple publishers that just disappeared or went bankrupt. So you can have a contract, you can have done everything right, legally speaking, and still not get paid for that. I really do this for the writers. Being a literary translator is a good way to make friends. It's a good way to build cross-cultural understanding, and I really enjoy working with the writers. It is a community, even if it's often virtual. I have worked with very wonderful and beautiful publishers who just have been completely supportive. But the main drawback I can think of is that if you wish to keep your cats in the very expensive grain-free organic cat food to which they've become accustomed, you may not have a steady paycheck there. I thought I would just talk about some of the other projects I've done. This is a book by Jose Moreno Hernandez, Soaring to New Heights, and his story last year became a major motion picture, A Million Miles Away. I didn't realize it was going to be a major motion picture and found out about that later, but it was this is a story of Jose's story. He was a child migrant farm worker who became a NASA astronaut and was rejected by NASA something like 16 times. Again, I was going to tell the high school students that just don't give up. I translated Elegy for Joseph Cornell by Maria Negroni. I'm working with Veronica Gonzalez Arredondo again. She writes about a lot of issues with immigration impacting women and children from Central America, making that journey across the US into the United States, and also writes about gender violence and femicide. Andrew mentioned that vicarious trauma. Perhaps if you're translating poetry, you don't you're not interpreting in situations of life or death, but there are stories that stay with you. I'm working with a lot of writers from the Yucatan, have translated a couple books by Carla Marufo. I'll see her again in December, and we're going to do a book opening at the Lorca Center in Merida, Yucatan. Carolina Eses, really a wonderful publisher in Seattle, Washington, put this out. And then I work with publishers in Mexico. This is from a university Press, also by Veronica Gonzalez Arredondo. So it's just, it's really a beautiful thing to work with writers and poets from all over the world. And for me, the advantages definitely are more than the disadvantages, but publishing poetry doesn't pay a whole lot to begin with. And if your passion is publishing poetry and translation, you are a bit further down the readership list.
I love that. I love how you put that. Because yeah, I've heard that before for sure. And Adriana, I see your question on the chat. We're gonna get to that for sure. Thank you for adding your questions. Those of you who are here, please feel free to add your questions on the chat, and we will get to them. But one of the things that I wanted to ask you, Allison, specifically, how do you start the process? You know, how do you, let's say that you have a specific author that you work with and they say, okay, I have this book, you know, how does the process start of kind of determining, you know, which sections to start translating first? You know, what does that like, you know, what does that look like?
Sure. So do you want me to start from meeting the author or just with
Sure.
the, okay. Um, well, you know, I just read a lot and then I approach the writer. I've had fairly good success with that. The only, every writer I've reached out to has been willing to work with me. And really, it's such a leap of faith. It's a complete leap of faith, I suppose, both on my part and on their part, just to trust this person who works in your language. It's gotten easier as I've gotten more publications, but it just really is about trust on that level. The only writer who I've reached out to and hasn't been able to work with already had an agent, and the writer was very willing to work with me, but the agent thought they were sitting on a gold mine and wanted to find a bigger translator working with a bigger publisher. And that was 5 years ago now, and unfortunately, those books haven't been translated or published in translation yet. So just something to think about. But if the writer has the rights and you can contact them directly, it can lead to very interesting and deep discussions and even to lasting friendships. And then as far as starting a project, I guess you start with the beginning. Marianne Moore says imaginary gardens with real toads in them. I believe it was Edith Grossman who said first she looked up all the words she didn't know, and then you look up all the words you do know, because as far as imaginary gardens with real toads, you're working with a work of fiction, so it's imaginary, but the better you know the language, the region, the culture, the slang, the culinary terms, the religious terms, terms about weather, culturally specific terms, the better, because yeah, a literal a literal translation doesn't work. And if you're just moving forward and translating a word, you're going to miss all those phrases that may have a completely different meaning or nuance, even from one Spanish-speaking country to another.
Very, very interesting for sure. And I did want to ask Andrew about that, because we all, you know, some of you who are here are very experienced interpreters and also translators, and we have to deal with slang, we have to deal with idioms, humor, all of these really annoying little pieces of communication that I guess make communication beautiful, but at the same time makes it really challenging for us as interpreters and translators to deal with. Especially I can only imagine trying to convey the same emotion through poetry, and making sure that your words are equal to what the author intended. So I can imagine that collaboration that has to take place. But for Andrew, I wanted to ask you the same. I know you are an instructor, and you are also an experienced interpreter. How do you approach teaching your students about facing jargon, facing abbreviations, facing idioms? What is your approach to kind of help them understand how to deal with that type of communication?
Wow, this is a loaded question for interpreters.
I know.
Because again, like you were saying with the translation, I'm sure it is incredibly difficult to find the equivalent of what the author's message was. That said, translators do have a little bit more time and space to consider that. Whereas interpreters, you're right, one of the biggest challenges, especially for new interpreters, is, are idioms or expressions, slang, things like that. This is one of the biggest challenges that interpreters face. It still gets me sometimes after so many years, because with so many different countries that speak Spanish is my language pair. And within all of those different countries and regions, you have different dialects and slang, and it's all different, and millions of people that speak the same language, but different ways of speaking it is very, very challenging. So the first thing I want to say to address that is, first of all, a literal word for word interpretation is rarely correct. We give lots of examples in our trainings of some really strange expressions that we have in English. The main one being it's raining cats and dogs, which would make absolutely no sense in most other languages. And just kind of the strategies about that, but also understanding that an accurate and faithful interpretation isn't word for word. You're really going for the spirit and the meaning, the content of the meaning, rather than the actual individual words that we're interpreting. And kind of the way to overcome that is just what I was saying earlier, is continually listen to media, books, read books in both languages. And the more exposure you have to the languages with which you work, the better equipped you will be for encountering those situations and kind of overcoming those. And you'll really just keep up all of the different ways that people use language, because on top of that, it's also always growing. Language is always changing. I mean, if you think about how we talk now versus the words that we used 40, 50 years ago, it's constantly evolving. And so just keeping up with, listening to, I listen to a lot of audiobooks and podcasts in both languages, especially when I'm driving around to different interpreting assignments, because I'll always learn something. And then, just practicing with some of that interpreter protocol in situations where maybe you don't know what they're saying. I know for legal interpreters, this might not be an option. For medical interpreters, we do have the option to clarify, to intervene, and make sure that we are getting the best meaning in those situations. And there's a lot of training around with our new interpreters, especially on kind of getting over your nerves about intervening and making sure that you are providing an accurate interpretation. I know if you're a simultaneous interpreter, that is not a luxury you have. So my advice would be continually develop your skills and listen to as much media in both languages, spoken media as well, to develop an ear for those kind of things like slang and different expressions would be my best advice.
Yeah, that's excellent. I totally agree with that. I started kind of losing my Spanish, and I'm like, oh my God, I need to do something about it. And started reading a lot of literature in Spanish that was not translated, that it was, written by Spanish speaking authors. And it's helped me so much to make sure that I keep up with language, because you're absolutely right, especially with a language like Spanish. But I know we have many languages here represented, but our languages just evolve, and they're alive and they're beautiful. And we just, as interpreters and translators, we really have to keep up with that. I have here in the state of Georgia, we have a radio station that is very particular because, to me at least, they use a lot of Spanglish. So they use a combination of both. And I just find it fascinating because they just move from one language to another so easily with no accent in either. And it's just fascinating to me how they manage to do that. So I'm not going to do that, but it's just fascinating how people have evolved with language and this, you know, how we all adapt to our environment. So thank you for that. So I do have some questions that are on the chat, and we're going to get to that. So thank you, Allison and Andrew. I do appreciate the, you know, the honesty of your answers, and we're going to get to some of the questions that we have for you on the chat. I do want to kind of give you an overview of educational interpreting and kind of give you that perspective, and also kind of show you how I got to do what I do. But you know, the bottom line that I hear from Allison and Andrew and some of the things that you're writing on the chat is the trust, right? That are, you know, we all establish some type of trust with the people that we work with, whether we're working with physicians or educators or judges. You know, the bottom line is that we have to establish that trust and be able to, you know, really show through our communication that we are trustworthy. And that we are able to communicate the best that we can. So I do want to share my screen if I can, but it seems like technology is just not going to help me today. All right, so we'll skip that part. I'll just talk to you. How about that? So again, you know, one of the I guess fascinating pieces of the field of interpreting in education that I have found is that it's a great combination of a little bit of legal, a little bit of community, a little bit of medical interpreting. I didn't start interpreting in schools right away. My first passion was medical interpreting, and I started working for a children's hospital here in the state of Georgia. My training is in social work, and so I'm bilingual. Nobody checked whether I actually spoke Spanish. They just assumed that I could interpret for the next cardiology appointment, right? You're just thrown in these situations, and, you know, no training, no checking my language proficiency, just go ahead and do it. So that right away just showed me that, you know, I needed to do better. I needed to find opportunities, and I wish I would have met Andrew at that point so I could get some training. But at that time, years ago, you know, there was really very few opportunities to do any type of training for medical interpreting. So I basically trained myself on the job, and I am sure I made thousands of mistakes. Eventually, little by little, you know, I started finding opportunities to get better. You know, each meeting was actually a training opportunity. And I really highly recommend that you see each meeting, each encounter that you have as an opportunity to learn. I was talking to a few students last night, and we were talking about how, you know, making sure that you have something to write with anytime you go to a meeting is really important, not only for taking notes, but also because you're going to encounter a lot of words that are just unknown. And so really allowing yourself to be humble enough to say, you know what, I have a question, I don't know this term, is really important. And I see that sometimes as interpreters, we are, maybe it's just me, perfectionists, and we just want to be perfect all the time and not ask any questions. And I think it should be the opposite. The more questions you ask, the better interpreter you are. And so really encouraging you to see those questions as you know, opportunities for you to educate yourself and do better next time. But with interpreting and education, one of the messages that I want to share with you is that, you know, sometimes interpreters see the educational setting as the easy setting to get into, and it's totally not. And we really appreciate those of you who are coming from the medical field and the legal field to really get that additional training and overview of what education is, to make sure that you are there supporting the families and the educators the way you should be. And so, you know, once I worked in the Children's Hospital for a while, I had the opportunity to work in one of the largest school systems here in the state of Georgia. And I thought, okay, I have, I don't know, 8 years of experience as a medical interpreter. I'm going to be just fine. And I was not. I made a lot of mistakes. I was coming into a different world full of abbreviations, full of information that I had no idea, what it was about. Again, I was kind of pushed into the special education field with no training, absolutely no support. And here I was just kind of on my own, figuring out what I needed to do. We had, at that time, we had about 134 schools, and I interpreted for all of them. So it was incredibly overwhelming, but at the same time, it was the best training for me. And now I'm at the point that I can share all that information with my students and say, don't do this because this is just not going to work. So I think it's important to make sure that that when you are trained in the field of education, that you find trainers that have actually worked inside of a school. Because we can tell you the theory, we can give you the framework, but it is important that you hear what actually happens, right? And how the teams work and how things just sometimes don't work the way you want them to work. Things like, using your pre-session or your formal introduction. Sometimes you may not be allowed to do that. And so the whole meeting kind of goes each way. So it's really important to kind of have that structure. And I really appreciate Andrew mentioning how that real life experience does matter from the instructors that you hear. So terminology, yes, Sarah, it is incredibly complex. There's lots of legal terminology. If you are venturing into the special education area, these are legally based meetings. So it is important that you come as prepared as possible, not only because it's ethically necessary for you to do that, but also because anytime, I clicked the wrong thing, Allison, so just ignore me. Anytime you have an interpreter that comes into a special education meeting and who feels unprepared and who's anxious about being there, it just creates more anxiety for everybody. And everybody's already anxious, right? We have parents who may have a child that may have some areas of improvement. So we have parents who may be just, confused about seeing 7, 8, 9, 10 professionals in front of them. They may not have a lot of information ahead of time about what the meeting is about. The educators are also sometimes anxious about working with an interpreter, so they bring that anxiety in. So if we have an interpreter who's not ready and who is not given enough information to be able to prepare, we have a very chaotic meeting. So I really recommend that you get as much information as you possibly can from the educators. Sometimes as freelancers, that's not always possible. So really, I encourage you to advocate for yourselves. If you work with different agencies, make sure that those agencies are speaking to the educators and ask them for information ahead of time. Because the more knowledge that you have before you come into the meeting, the easier it's going to be for you to face some of that terminology. And it's not going to be a smooth ride, right? It's not going to be, all of the words that are going to be conveyed, I know it's just not going to happen. But at least you'll have a little bit more information to go with. So again, in special education, you have the opportunity to use some of the legal terminology if you're familiar with that. Sometimes we have situations that are mediation meetings. Sometimes the parents may not agree with some of the things that the school is offering, or the school needs something else from the parents and they just don't agree. So you have mediation meetings where a lot of that legal terminology comes in. I was very fortunate to have learned a lot of the medical terminology when I did, because I did get to use it, and I do use it still in special education, right? Because we have a lot of children who may have multiple disabilities, genetic conditions. And so we bring all of that terminology into this field. And so that's what I love about interpreting in education, that it's such a patchwork of so many different areas, and you get to see the change and you get to see your impact right away. Which, you know, I know that in some of the other fields you do get to see that, but you know, sometimes interpreters in education work inside of a school, so we get to know the families for a long time. And it's just amazing. It's very rewarding in that sense. I'm going to talk about the challenges because, again, I am very real and I don't sugarcoat it because the challenges are there. But I think it's important that we focus on the why that we do this. Otherwise, it's really going to be difficult to do this job. So some suggestions that I have for you. I have we have a lot of great resources on the NAETISL website. We have best practices that we have developed to interpret, not only in special education, but also in general education. Sometimes we focus a lot on the terminology of special education, which is really important because it's very complex. But at the same time, it's important that you start with the basics, right? And make sure that you are knowledgeable enough of general education terminology to be able to prepare for more complex encounters. So there are lots of resources. We have articles that are written by interpreters in education. We have a lot of folks here in this call who are some of our authors. I see Felix, I see Agostina, who's one of our wonderful course instructors as well. But we all kind of work together to create some of these materials because we feel that, you know, we don't want to pull information out of some research paper. We want to pull information from people who are actually in the field. And that's really important because, again, it needs to be real. It needs to be applicable to you. You have lots of resources for you as interpreters. You have glossaries that are free for you to download. You have pre-sessions, which is your formal introduction, already translated in various languages. So feel free to download that information as well. But we also have a lot of resources for families. And I think it's important that we include them as advocates for their own language access. And sometimes we forget that families have a lot of power, and we need to kind of support that power by giving them resources so that they can communicate whether language access is happening or not. And so we do have information about how to voice their concerns if an interpreter is not, if I'm not understanding the interpreter. I had a student last night who mentioned that she speaks Portuguese and she is often called to interpret for families who speak Spanish. And she can't say no because this is her principal asking her to do that. And she's like, how do I explain to them that they're two different languages, right? But the families need to speak up as well, and we need to help them feel empowered to do that. So you do have some resources on the website that you can access. You also have information about child interpreters, and I'm glad, Andrew, you brought that up, to make sure that they are, that the families are aware of the implications of using minors interpret. We need to help the families decide and train to be able to do their work. I'm going to turn off my camera because it looks like my internet is a little iffy. The last thing I wanted to say about that is that we do have a course coming up. It's a 2-session course on Saturdays. I believe it's going to be in September for multilingual high schoolers. And it is not a course to train kids to interpret. I wanted to make sure that that's very clear. It's actually a course to teach them about language access. We want to make sure that the kids understand what language access should look like for their family. So we want to grow advocates because we think that it's important for them to be able to advocate for themselves as well. So I think that is all I wanted to say, and I want to see if you have any questions for us. I do encourage you to access our resources. Ala, I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Those resources are available to anybody. You do not have to be a member of NAETISL to access the resources, you feel free to go to our website and download any of that information. There's no password, there's nothing. We just create them because we call them selfish resources. We created them for ourselves, but then we wanted to share them with the community as well. So feel free to download that information as well. Okay. So I want to see if you have any questions, and you feel free to unmute yourselves and ask any questions of the audience. And in the meantime, while you do that, I'm going to kind of check the chat and see if you have additional questions that I may have missed. Then I want to go ahead and open the chat for you if you have questions that we did not cover. Okay, I see a question for Allison. It looks like you responded, Allison, if you're translating from English to Spanish and Spanish to English. So
Yes, I do work in other languages, but not as a translator at this time. I see there are a lot of questions, actually.
yeah, well, let me see. I have Adriana, you raised your hand, so go ahead and let us know what your question is, Adriana.
Yes. Hi, Anna. We were
Hi.
we were gonna meet
I
today.
know, we were gonna meet today.
So
Oh,
anyway,
there we go.
my question is regarding I'm having very hard times because I've been working in education for many, many years, and I know that we have resources and we have, like you said, you're working on a test. We have a test, but my district is not really testing anyone. They just assume that they're qualified, whatever. But there are also many other implications, not only what you know about the languages, but the ethics of working as an interpreter, the medical, the legal, and my concern is we have to have interpreters prepared, not only in the language, but in the ethical part. You guys are creating a test and we're working on it. I told you I'm a member of another organization, blah, blah, but nobody's enforcing it. Districts still not preparing their interpreters. And if they have interpreters prepared, qualified, that know all of that, they are putting them aside and they say, oh, we can't do that right now. We're not going to train. We're not going to, no. I'm one of those who say, Adriana, please be quiet, something. So I know is probably a bigger topic or something, but yeah, I wanted to, since I'm here and we're here, why not talking about?
Absolutely. I love that. And it is very easy to get frustrated, especially in the educational field, Adriana, and I really understand it very well. Like I said at the beginning, I have the privilege of leading this organization and hearing from all angles, from all kinds of school districts, small, rural, suburban, anything and everything. I hear it. And I am, it's such an amazing position to be in, because then I have all this knowledge that I can share with people. So I think one of the things that I have learned, Adriana, is that many school districts are not doing the right thing, but many school districts are. And we tend to focus on the ones that are. There are so many school districts that, unfortunately, they took positive steps because they were sued, or the Office of Civil Rights kind of started, observing some of their procedures, and they were under kind of observation, and they changed their ways. Whatever the reason was, they changed their ways, and now they have entire departments where they support multilingual families, where they train all of their interpreters. They have made an amazing change. Some school districts will never, ever do that. Some school districts will feel that providing a Google Translate button on their website is good enough, and they have fulfilled the language access button. And we are never going to change them, right? Until our families speak up. And so that's why I think it's important that we help the families understand what positive and what quality language access looks like, because we have seen a lot of changes, not only in the state of Georgia, but other states that we work with, where families have said, hey, I need an interpreter in the next school board meeting. No one's ever offered me one, but I have something to say. And when families do that, the schools do listen, and they have to listen. And I see that some of you wrote information about language access legislation. Language access legislation has been around since the 60s, right? But it's subject to interpretation. And some schools do an amazing job, others not. And I have, Felix Ramos, who is our resource development coordinator. He's actually doing a series of language access champion interviews, because we want to highlight best practices. We want to show school districts what they can do with the resources they have. Some school districts just may not have the appropriate resources, or they may allocate resources in not the way that we feel they should. But other school districts are doing the right thing. And so we want to highlight that with the purpose of showing this can actually happen if you put the work in it. So I don't know if I answered your question, Adriana, but I know it's a bigger topic, and I feel you, because it's there, right? It's a reality. So.
If I could jump in there for a second.
Absolutely.
To that, man, there's so much on this. I was talking about earlier just how involved interpreting for education really is. And I had put something in there about IEPs that are kind of a combination between legal, medical, educational, and just general community interpreting. And it's very difficult to find someone that is prepared and qualified enough for that. And it can be detrimental for the families and for the students and for the school if they have someone that they just grabbed that is, oh, you're bilingual, let's send you into this with no preparation. And it's very frustrating. That's part of the reason why the Interpreter Studio exists, is because we recognize that can be a problem sometimes. I did see you mention that people had mentioned legislation earlier, Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Yes, that exists. However, what we see sometimes is that it is up for interpretation what constitutes a qualified interpreter, especially when you have in an educational field that hasn't been hashed out as deeply in legislation as the medical or legal field has, for example. Some examples of what some districts that we work with are doing to what Adriana was saying, and her frustrations about their district is Denver Public Schools, for example, has an annual training specifically for translators and interpreters that they run themselves. And they will not allow an interpreter or a translator to be contracted for school events if they have not first attended their own annual training, because they want to go over protocol and standards in preparation for that. So that's one thing that some of the school districts here are doing to prepare their interpreters. We talk a lot about ethics and protocol and best practices during these trainings. Anna had also said she's coming out here to Denver for our family and community engagement organization that started specifically for this problem that we have. And so there are districts around the country. I can imagine that it's not just Denver, the public schools that's doing this, but several other districts have recognized the need for quality language service. Especially for these diverse families that have special needs children, or that are in special education, just because of how sensitive that is. And so I've noticed over my career that there are more and more resources popping up, like family and community engagement organizations, to strive for quality language services. And I hope that, with those resources, you can inspire your district to kind of take a few steps to recognize that there is a difference between a bilingual person and a trained and qualified interpreter, especially when you're talking about IEPs. I mean, I was writing down some of the things that I remember from IEPs and just how difficult the language can be, especially if you're not prepared for that. I'd also like to say that at the Interpreter Studio, we have a lot of videos for interpreters. If you're also looking for other resources, we have some courses on there that are specifically interpreting for early intervention, early childhood education, interpreting for IEPs. There are lots of resources out there to get terminology and to prepare interpreters ahead of time for especially specifically educational settings. So just take a look, and I hope that you can inspire your district and to start using some of those additional resources to find those qualified interpreters.
I love that. Well said, Andrew. Thank you so much for that. For sure, resources are out there, and they're beginning to be more and more as we speak. But I do want to get to a question from Scott, and this could be for either Andrew or Allison. But he says, when we talk about translating for the movie entertainment industry, is there anything we can possibly do to increase our opportunities? I recall there was a strike by the writers last year in Hollywood. Would interpreters and translators be welcomed into their union? Oof, that's a super amazing question. I don't know, Andrew and Allison, what do you think?
Maybe subtitlers, subtitling or dubbing. Yeah, the voice work, there are just, I think Scott may have gone, but there are just a lot of questions that on a legal level with AI, with people's voices being used, all kinds of things I think are still being decided. So yeah, there's a lot we don't know about that right now.
I gotta say, I don't have much experience in the entertainment interpretation in industry, so I don't know. I did once look into doing some voiceovers, or how you could get into being I guess for subtitles, like Allison said. It seems very, very difficult to kind of break into that industry. Sounds like there's, this voice acting kind of industry, not necessarily interpretation, but it sounds fascinating. That sounds fun. About the closest thing I ever got is that I think my voice is on an MRI machine at one of the hospitals in Spanish here in Denver, and that's about as close as I could get for it. So
I like that. Oh, you're famous, you're on MRI. Everybody will hear you. I love that. But yeah, that's an interesting concept. I know we had there was a lot of conversation on social media about some of the, I guess, subtitles for Squid Games, was it? I think it was, that it was just not a very good translation of some of the slang and some of the things that were said. The series, if you don't know about it, is in Korean, and so the subtitles, of course, were in English, and the Korean population was just very upset because the subtitles were not, reflective of the cultural piece that they were trying to show. So I'm sure that happens quite a bit. So interpreters are, I don't think this particular profession is going to end no matter what AI, brings to us. It's important that we remain as relevant as possible. So thank you for that. Let's see. Oh, I have a question for Allison. Have you ever translated Spanish literature into English that included direct or indirect non-binary language and found it challenging to convey those nuances in English? Oof, love that question.
Well, it is interesting. I can't say that I have specifically, but sometimes you are translating work that has gender neutral language in the Spanish, and then you have to figure out what to do with that. I translated a book, and it has a play on words between, it's called prima, which means cousin, but then the whole poem is about primavera, and that gets lost. I mean, that was very tricky to kind of, in this, it was a prose poem to convey the play on words with prima and primavera. Because in English, I mean, cousin isn't gendered, but then in Spanish, brother, sister could be both. So yeah, there are some things that come up. Another thing was that there was a poem, and again, this isn't a non-binary example specifically, but it talked about la muerte, you know, death is a character, but then in English to refer to death as she, because I did have to make some pronoun choices. It just it wasn't really what the poem was suggesting, you know, that death in English would have a kind of have female pronouns. So there are a lot of decisions like that you have to make every day in translation work.
I love that. Thank you for that. Agostina, did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you very much.
Awesome. Thank you. Oh, hi, Yvonne. It's nice to see you. Yvonne Ferreira. I know we talked via email quite a bit, but I hadn't met you. So thank you for being here.
Thank you.
And I do want to kind of address a comment that Laura Gonzalez put on the chat. Absolutely right. So the Office of Civil Rights requires school districts to document not only the requests and interpretation and translation services, but also proof that the staff who do it are qualified. And again, I think that is completely correct. Training of interpreters is again subject to interpretation. We have, for example, we met with a school district in Washington State that their concept of training interpreters is just creating an online, you know, offering with no guide, just basically take it on your own, no self-assessment, no evaluation of proficiency, it's just good to go, and then you are qualified to interpret. So, you know, some school districts are doing the opposite. They offer, you know, we work very closely with the state of Massachusetts. We are actually an approved provider of training of interpreters in the state of Massachusetts. And that means that, you know, interpreters in freelance and also school-based interpreters go through our training to become qualified to interpret in the schools. And we have a lot of one-on-one, you know, communication with students. We have language coaches, meaning that, you know, interpreters who speak languages other than Spanish are also supported. And I think that's really important in any training that you take, that you have language specific support, because we can give you all the information in English and give you all these, you know, high level definitions, but you really need to have that same information in your language and be able to work in small groups and debate about language, debate about what terms sound better than others. So it's really important that you do have that language support and that accountability. You know, any course that you take that does not give you kind of an assessment piece, an evaluation piece, you need to find a way to be self-accountable, because that's the whole point of, you know, of taking a training. So again, you know, Laura, I agree with you. It just depends on the state. Some states are, you know, taking training, a version of the training is different than in other states. So it's not, you know, one size does not fit all when it comes to training. So any other questions or any other comments that that Allison and Andrew want to make in terms of next steps for interpreters who are just beginning in your areas? Anything else that you want to share in order to get us started?
Real quick, Anna, I just wanted to make a comment about what you just said. Is that's actually the language specific training is one of the largest challenges that we have as interpreter educators. Obviously, I don't speak tons of other languages. I can only really offer language specific support to our Spanish interpreters. And, you know, all of the content that we provide, whether it be medical terminology or, you know, school related terminology, academic terminology, legal terminology, a lot of the courses I have to present in English just because there's no way to do language specific. So it gives you that content on like the one-sided part of it. But I hope that, you know, when I teach my BTG classes or when we're doing other trainings, I very much encourage the interpreters to go find their other resources. It's a lot of self-paced and self-motivation that these interpreters have to do. And especially if I'm teaching a group of several different languages that are represented in a room, I will refuse to give the Spanish equivalent just out of fairness, because, you know, sometimes I'll have a bunch of Spanish interpreters, but I cannot give the, you know, Arabic or Somali or Vietnamese or any other language equivalents for that terminology. But there are so many resources online, and there are lots of local organizations, depending on where you are, that aren't necessarily specific language-based organizations, but maybe just community organizations for that culture or community. And I very much encourage everybody to become a part of those as well, to really just keep up their language access.
I think that's a super great point, and we've actually been working with a variety of organizations. For example, for Amharic, it's a language that, you know, has very few resources out there, specifically in education and special education. Of course, you know, education looks very different in many of our countries, and so we have to almost invent language to fit some of the terms that we encounter in education. And so we're kind of working with the organization to be able to create a glossary of just the basic terms that may be heard in education. And I think that's a great collaboration, and we're learning quite a bit about what needs to be done and how we need to educate educators about language. But just through that collaboration is really important. So, but thank you, Andrew. And Allison, anything else that you wanted to add?
No, not particularly. Just going back to the question about non-binary language, you know, a lot of things in Spanish do revert to the masculine pronouns. I also teach, and I have a class of educators, early childhood development educators. There's one person who identifies as male in the class, and the other 20 students are female. But I think there's a lot that we are still figuring out with that. For instance, at a parent-teacher conference, if the padres who come are, you know, mothers, you know, or yeah, there's a lot that we still have to, a lot of work we still have to do with language and gender and neutrality.
For sure. And, you know, many languages are very gender focused. And so we do have to work with that. We actually, Agostina is one of our course instructors, and we're teaching a class on translation in education specifically. And when we talk a little bit about that during the first session, and how to make sure that we are as inclusive as possible. So again, language is very much alive, and you know, we have to adapt to it as best as we can. So so I want to see if you have any other questions. Those of you who are here, anything else that you wanted to share, feel free to open your mic if you need to, or write it on the chat. So I'll give you just a second. And if not, it is perfectly okay. We are going to be sharing this recording on our YouTube channel, so just be on the lookout for that. And again, feel free to reach out to us, you know, NAETISL.org. I'm going to go ahead and put my email on the chat if you do not have it already, because I know I have many friends here. But feel free to reach out to us. We also have contact form on our NAETISL website that you can complete so that you can stay informed. And again, our newsletter comes out every month, and we have a lot of great information about different resources, but also different opportunities that you may have for professional development. Sometimes we also have really bad translations just to bring a smile to your day, because it helps us remember how essential we are. So feel free to reach out anytime, and if we can be of any support, feel free to let us know. So I do want to thank you for being here and spending this time with us. Super great to see so many of you here, and nice to meet you. For those of you who we have emailed each other, so super great to see you here. And thank you, Allison and Andrew. Absolutely amazing. We greatly appreciate your time as well. Okay.
Thank you,
So
Anna, and thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Have a
you.
great Friday, and we'll see you soon.
Take care.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye.